You have been lied to about the legends of the American West. Jesse James was not the monster the history books claimed he was. In the shadows of the frontier, he was merely a distraction. A dime novel hero used to mask a far more visceral and organized geography of death. There were shadows in the high plains so dark that the law didn't just fail to stop them. The law refused to even name them in public. 5 names. 5 criminal empires built on a foundation of pure, unadulterated lead. These are the merchants of death. And by the time this file is closed, Jesse James will look like a saint. A blast of dynamite that echoes through the dark, suffocating Jackson County woods. The scent of ozone, scorched iron, and the sudden realization of stolen dreams. October 1866. The Reno Brothers just committed the first train robbery in American history. The frontier is no longer a place of destiny, it is a crime scene. A rain of high-velocity lead in the narrow claustrophobic corridors of Coffeyville. 2 banks one morning, and an entire bloodline of brothers buried under a relentless wall of Winchester fire. Pure ritualistic terror in the heart of the Creek Nation. The Rufus Buck Gang didn't want the gold coins in your pocket. They wanted the absolute submission of your soul and the horrific screams of the innocent. A synchronized ambush executed with cold military precision at 1,000 yards. This was precision crime, managed with the calculated logistics of a corporate death syndicate. A mountain of corpses hidden in the jagged blue shadows of the Colorado peaks. A vengeance written in the ritualistic blood of 30 innocent souls. Carved by the hands of fanatical demons who claim to hear the voice of a vengeful God. You think you know the Wild West? You don't. Welcome to the American Vault, where the cold cases of the frontier are finally brought into the jagged light of truth. Jackson County, Indiana, was the birthplace of a new kind of American darkness. Before the Reno Brothers, stopping a moving locomotive was considered a physical impossibility. Then came Frank, John, Simeon, and William Reno, a family bound by blood and a profound, chilling lack of human conscience. They didn't just steal horses or rob stagecoaches in the dust. They invented the modern blueprint for the high-stakes heist. They were the undisputed pioneers of professional banditry, transforming disorganized crime into a structured, lethal, and profitable industry. Their greatest innovation was the train robbery, a tactic that turned the frontier's main artery into a mobile vault waiting to be cracked. By targeting the Iron Horse, they struck at the very heart of American commerce. They established the first sophisticated safe house networks, corrupting local officials with a precision that predated the organized mobs by 50 years. In towns like Seymour, the Reno name was whispered with a mix of awe and absolute dread. But terror always breeds its own shadow, and the people of Indiana grew tired of the law's strategic silence. The gang's unchecked violence eventually sparked a fire they couldn't extinguish with gold. In 1868, a secret committee known as the Scarlet Mask decided that a courtroom was too slow for the Reno bloodline. A massive lynch mob, fueled by years of repressed rage, overpowered the guards at the jail. They dragged the brothers from their heavy iron cells and prepared to give them a permanent, silent peace under the Indiana moon. 3 brothers swaying from the wooden rafters of a makeshift gallows, the architects of the heist were finally silenced by the very people they had once terrified. The Reno legacy remains a grim reminder that the first to innovate in crime are often the first to pay the price. Bob Dalton was a man fueled by a lethal, simmering dose of envy. He didn't just want the money, he wanted the enduring fame of his cousins, the James Brothers. On the morning of October 5, 1892, he decided to pull the ultimate power move of the outlaw era. His plan was as arrogant as it was suicidal, robbing two banks at the exact same time in the same small town. He chose Coffeyville, Kansas, a place he wrongly assumed would roll over in the face of his dark reputation. But Bob Dalton was catastrophically wrong about the character of the American pioneer. The civilians of Coffeyville weren't victims. They were veterans of a hard life. As the gang entered the Condon and First National banks, the townspeople didn't run for cover. They ran to the local hardware stores, arming themselves with every Winchester rifle and double-barreled shotgun they could find. What followed was 12 minutes of pure, high-velocity carnage that the newspapers would call Death Alley. A crossfire so dense and relentless that the air became thick with the metallic smell of lead. Bob and Grat Dalton were shredded by a wall of fire, their bodies collapsing into the Kansas dust like discarded rags. They died in the dirt, their ambitious faces made unrecognizable by the fury of a town. The Dalton legend didn't end in the glory they craved. It ended as a cautionary tale of hubris written in blood. It remains a grim testament to what happens when criminal ambition meets a community with shared justice. Emmett Dalton was the only one to survive, carrying 23 bullet wounds as a living monument to his brother's failure. He spent years in the shadows of a prison cell, reflecting on the morning his family's ambition turned into a grave. While most frontier gangs killed for gold, the Rufus Buck Gang killed for a much darker statement. They were a group of 5 teenagers who unleashed a 13-day nightmare across the territory in 1895. In the heart of the Creek Nation of Oklahoma, Rufus Buck decided to set the frontier on fire. These weren't misunderstood youths. They were sociopaths fueled by racial resentment and a profound, bottomless hatred. They didn't just rob their victims, they sought to destroy their spirits before systematically taking their lives. Their spree was a sickening catalog of depravity, including systematic rape, torture, and random executions that shocked the entire nation. Even the most hardened outlaws of the territory found the Buck Gang's methods too extreme to stomach. The U.S. Marshals were forced to launch one of the most massive manhunts in history to track these children. The hunt involved hundreds of Creek Light horsemen, men who knew the land and the gravity of the crimes committed. Captured after a bloody and desperate standoff, the gang was brought before the legendary hanging Judge Parker. Judge Parker, a man who had seen the worst of humanity, called them the most depraved he had ever encountered. In July 1896, the entire gang was walked to the gallows, and they were hanged simultaneously in Fort Smith. It was a rare and somber mass execution, required to purge a level of evil that defied their young age. They left behind a trail of shattered families and a deep scar on the history of Oklahoma. Their names remain a dark shadow that most history books are still too terrified to explore. Now we enter the realm of the professionals, a group that operated like a corporate syndicate of high-stakes crime. The Wild Bunch wasn't a collection of thugs. They were the technicians of the outlaw world, led by the charismatic Butch Cassidy and the lethal, silent Sundance Kid. They mastered the art of the getaway before the crime even began. They understood that the key to a successful robbery wasn't the gun, but the logistics of the escape. They established a network of pre-planned relay stations with fresh horses, allowing them to vanish into the jagged canyons like ghosts in the desert. For over a decade, they outmaneuvered the Pinkerton National Detective Agency at every single turn. The American railroads were forced to spend millions on private armies just to find their shadow. Every robbery was timed to the second, and every movement of the law was analyzed with cold mathematical precision. They were the undisputed apex predators of the hole in the wall, a place where the law simply could not reach. But the turn of the 20th century brought a new kind of law, a law that even Butch Cassidy couldn't outrun. The telegraph and the telephone made the vast West feel too small for men who live by the gun. Sensing the end, they fled to South America, attempting to recreate their criminal empire in a new, lawless land. Their final stand in Bolivia was not a Hollywood ending. It was a desperate, bloody suicide in a mud-walled house surrounded by an army. They were the last of the great outlaw gangs, a sophisticated machine that made the old ways of crime look obsolete. The Wild Bunch proved that even the most perfect criminal system eventually falls to progress. At the absolute top of our evidence file is a name that still whispers through the Colorado peaks like a cold wind: the Espinosas. In 1863, while the American Civil War was tearing the nation apart, Felipe and Vivian Espinosa began a war of their own. This was a private crusade of ritualistic murder, driven by a fanatical and twisted religious zeal that bordered on absolute madness. Felipe Espinosa claimed he had received a divine vision from the Virgin Mary, commanding him to kill 600 people. He didn't just kill, he kept a meticulous notebook of his progress toward that horrific goal. Every victim's name was recorded, and every ritualistic detail of their death was noted with a disturbing, quiet pride. They didn't rob for gold or survival. They murdered for a perceived holy vengeance against those they called Anglos. They stalked the lonely mountain passes of the San Luis Valley, killing travelers with axes, knives, and heavy jagged stones. They were serial killers in the truest sense of the word, decades before the term was ever conceptualized by modern law. The terror in the territory was so absolute that the governor of Colorado offered a life-changing bounty. That bounty attracted the attention of Tom Tobin, a legendary scout who was as relentless and cold as the men he hunted. Tobin didn't believe in the bureaucracy of a trial. He believed in the finality of the hunt. He tracked the Espinosas into the deepest brush of the mountains, and he ended the nightmare with cold, calculated steel. When he returned to the Army commander's office, he didn't bring paperwork. He reached into a blood-stained burlap sack, and he rolled 2 human heads across the wooden floor like bowling balls. The mountain demons were dead, but the memory of their ritualistic cruelty would haunt Colorado for generations to come. The Espinosas were never outlaws in the traditional sense. They were the personification of frontier horror. They are, without question, the #1 merchants of death in American history. The Wild West wasn't won by heroes in shining armor or white hats. It was survived by those who could stomach the absolute darkness of the men we have cataloged today. From the dynamite-blasted tracks of Indiana to the ritualistic bloodstains on the Colorado rocks, these names are permanent. They are etched into the very soil of this country, a brutal reminder of the price paid for civilization. Which of these gangs haunts your understanding of history the most? Tell us in the comments below. We read every single word of the evidence you provide in our community. If you have the stomach for the unvarnished truth behind the frontier legends, then subscribe to the American Vault. Our coffer of forgotten history and cold cases is never truly empty. This is The Vault, signing off for now. I'll see you at the next evidence file, in the shadows of the past. Until then, sleep with one eye open and your hand near the light.
Subscribe to the American Vault. Turn on the notifications, because in a world of shadows, the only thing more dangerous than the truth is not knowing it at all. See you in the next file.